You're listening to the Southampton Delivery Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the Southampton Football Club and all of the SFC fans.
We just got to go out and express ourselves.
Fonte with a scooping header.
We just got to get the job done. I'm here to get the job done.
It's infield to Mane, 25 yards out. Lovely ball for Pella. Onside, 1-0. Blue fast shot. Oh my word!
Unbelievable. He ran around a bit like Bambi on ice. It was very, very embarrassing to watch.
And now, your host, Matt Markstone. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Southampton Delivery Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the Southampton Football Club and all of the SFC fans. My name is Matt Markstone. I'm the host of the show. No matter where you are, no matter how you may be listening, thank you for making the show part of your day. I hope that you enjoy it. And on an evening where Saints have just come off a disappointing draw, it feels like a loss. It feels like we played so well in the first half and that we fell into the same mistakes again in the second. It really does sum up everything that it feels like to be a Saints fan. I know some people felt a little bit silly about the fireworks that happened before the match. I know people are always upset about the clappers, the clackers, or whatever they're called that are on the seats. And I know that we were all impressed by the display in the first half and some of the improvements that some of the players have made. And then the frustration that goes along with conceding in the second half and then giving up the late penalty. Once again, I know that is what our season, it's what last season was about. It's what we, I think, are used to at this point. And I think my guest this week, Richard Walters, who's an author who's written a new book about just that, the passion and the pain of being a Saints fan. I think it sums it all up. And I think that that in and of itself is the best and worst kind of introduction that I can give this week's episode. So, Richard, I spoke with Richard on Sunday, so obviously before the game, so we don't talk about the Brighton game. We'll save that for later. And in my mind, I was secretly hoping that we could save that match just so we could have a win to talk about next week, as we also talk about the Liverpool match. But yeah. So, also, there is something weird happening in my headphones. You can't hear it, but it literally sounds like there's a voice in my head. I can hear people talking. It's like my headphones are picking up some sort of radio signal, and it's really, really freaking me out. And it's making me lose concentration a little bit because it sounds like people are whispering in my head, and I don't like it. So I'm going to try to ignore them and talk through this as I give you the rest of this introduction. So I spoke with Richard Walters about his new book, and we'll talk all about that during the interview. We'll talk about how he came to write it, what it's like being a Saints fan, and we'll kind of like go through and try to set up the book so that when you go get your copy, because I think you will want to do that, you have an idea of what you're getting. And we will be giving away a copy of the book, and I'll tell you right now what you have to do in order to get that is you will have to retweet the tweet that is in or that is pinned to the top of my page for the next week, the episode tweet, and follow Richard on Twitter. He's new to Twitter. He's got large followings elsewhere, but new to Twitter. So he is at @rwaltersauthor. The link is also in the show notes, and he will be tagged in the post. So if you retweet that tweet and then give Richard a follow, you'll be entered to win a copy of the book, and we will mail that out to a winner. We'll announce that next week. So make sure that you do that. Give yourself a chance to win it. I am looking forward to getting my hands on a paper copy of the book. I'm very excited about that. So without anything else, I say we get to the interview with Richard. This is Richard Walters. You can get more from him at richardwaltersauthor.co.uk. You can follow him at @rwaltersauthor on Twitter. And here we are talking about his new book, Being a Saint: The Pain, Passion, and Pleasure of Being a Southampton FC Fan. We'd like to welcome to the Southampton Delivery Podcast, Richard Walters. He is a longtime Saints fan. He's written a new book, and you can find that book and much more about him at richardwaltersauthor.co.uk. But Richard, thank you for joining the show, and welcome. And I'm looking forward to talking to you about the book and about your time as a Saints fan and anything else that comes up.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Generally,
when we start the show, I like to talk a little bit about you and kind of get to know kind of how you became a Saints fan. It's always, it's nice to know whether it was a family thing or whether you kind of picked them out of thin air or whatever it was. But just growing up, did you grow up in the Southampton area or in the Hampshire area? I know that's actually kind of a large catchment area in terms of bringing in fans from kind of all over the place. But what was your early experience maybe with the team?
Well, I grew up, in fact, was born in a northern Hampshire town called Whitchurch. Probably I was destined to be a Saints fan from the age of 1 month old, because my dad was a passionate Saints fan, and he took me to my first game in April 1964, which is a long time ago now. It was Rotherham at home, and we won 6-1, and literally from that moment I was smitten, and there was no going back really.
6-1. That's quite the opening, I guess, introduction to the team. Is there anything that sticks out in your mind about, other than the score, maybe about the day, about arriving at the ground or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I was around about 8 years old, and I'm sure my mum gave my dad fierce instructions to look after me, and just as my dad always did. He looked after me, but as soon as we got in the ground, all the big, strong male Saints fans picked up all the children and passed them down shoulder high to the front. So for the whole of my first game, I stood about 30 yards away from my dad. Safe, of course, because in those days you were safe. But I never told my mum about that until she was 85 years old, because my dad would still have got in trouble for doing that. But it was an awe-inspiring thing, being so small in the old Dell, with the smoke and the crowd and the noise. It was incredible. And, I immediately sort of picked up on the passion of the fans and how excited my dad and his friend were. It was infectious for a little boy. But as I said, never did tell my mum about that until she was much, much older.
Yeah. Well, you gotta protect. There's a little bit of a bond there. You gotta protect that.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, first game, 8 years old, being inside the ground and stuff like that. And you said there was something infectious about it, and you can almost just kind of feel, the atmosphere. And I was an adult when I attended my first game, but I remember, and it wasn't even the atmosphere at West Ham isn't great, at the London Stadium, but I do remember walking out and kind of just the noise, and you can there's something about it. There's something different about it than just showing up to, my local team here, or one of the college teams in near me, but it's just, there's something different about it. And, it's hard to explain, but it is definitely something that I'm going to remember. And obviously it stuck with you, through your time as a fan. At that point, what were Saints like? Were they struggling against relegation? Were they kind of sitting mid-table, or what was that season, or what was that time in your life like in terms of how Saints were performing?
Well, they were in the old second division, which is the equivalent of the championship today. And they were a good championship team. They used to finish in the sort of top 6, but we didn't have playoffs then. So they were sort of toying with promotion, but had never played in the first division, equivalent of the Premier League now, until they got promoted in 1966, which was an exciting season. But they used to score lots of goals, and it was very exciting. And of course, when we got into League One, the equivalent of the Premier League, it was very exciting. And it was also the year that England won the World Cup for the one and only time. Mm-hmm. So that was a pretty spectacular season for me as a young boy. I mean, never to be repeated, I might add.
Right.
But yeah, pretty exciting. So the team was always very exciting, lots of goals, and good crowds in the old Dell. So yeah, very entertaining. When we actually went up to League One, we just went crazy. Probably the first 2 years in League One were the most crazy I can almost remember. We just scored so many goals. Ron Davis was playing for us. I think one season he scored about 43 goals.
Oh, man.
And bearing in mind we finished about 3 or 4 from bottom, we used to win 6-2, lose 6-2, draw 4 each. It was crazy. I think we conceded over 100 goals in that season, but I think we scored about 80 plus. So it really was quite incredible. So the first few years of my supporting career, I sort of assumed that's how it always was going to be.
Uh-huh.
Most of the time in those early years really were very similar. Lots of goals, very exciting. We were never one of the really big teams, but we used to hold our own. Certainly the first sort of 10 years of my support, it was a very exciting time.
Obviously, the last few years haven't been that way. But I can remember, early on watching under Pochettino and Koeman and thinking, this is how it's always going to be. This is this type of football, the goals, the players, the excitement. And then, having sat through the past couple of seasons, that obviously it's not how it always works out. So, it's been a bit of a rude awakening, but also I think this is normal. And I always remember this is like looking at teams like West Brom maybe, or a couple of other teams. And when we play them going like, I don't know any of those players. Like none of those players stand out to me. They just look like guys on the field. And then last year, I remember looking at our team going like, I really don't know a lot of those players. They just look like guys on the field. And I went like, oh no, we have become what I always hoped we wouldn't. But overall, it's been a wonderful experience, and the guys are great, and they're all putting in a shift, and that's really, I can't complain about that. I don't think.
Well, picking up on your point earlier about going to live games, I mean, all the way through those 2 awful years where we used to sort of lose and draw 0-0 all the time, I still remember going to sit in my season ticket seat and being optimistic and thinking it was going to be different this time. Unfortunately, it wasn't very often. But, I think that's really, for me, what it's all about being a Saints fan. It's about exciting football and passion, not necessarily winning, because we're not one of the big teams, but it's actually playing exciting football. And I think those 2 years, there was a sort of disconnect with the fan base, really, that I was very aware of talking to people we sit with in the ground and friends. Yeah, sort of disconnect, really, where, like you said, we became sort of very ordinary. And I don't think I remember many years in the last 54 when we were ordinary. Sometimes we were very bad, but yeah.
Well, I mean, you mentioned that season, where you concede maybe over 100, but you score a ton as well. And that it doesn't matter if you finish 17th doing that, or if you finish 17th like we did last year. One of those seasons leaves you feeling, I think a lot better about things. At least there was some entertainment, because some people, for football is the entertainment. It is an escape. It's a reason to go and something to put all your doubts and everything else away and to focus on the team. And I think, we were talking before we started recording about social media and all this stuff. Like sometimes it just turns into, this consumes every aspect of people's lives, and we never leave the team alone. And our moods are so affected, and I'm guilty of this too, but our moods are so affected by the performance of the team on the field. And it can kind of overwhelm you a little bit. And I just wonder if it was different when you were going, in the 60s, and even if you were flirting with relegation or whatever, if you always had this kind of a different feeling around it, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely true. I think that's the modern world. And people's expectations are raised so high, people who just joined supporting Saints, young people over here, they might have only just remembered the European years and the Koeman years and Pochettino, and then suddenly it's not so good. Obviously, people like myself who've been supporting the team for a long time, I can still remember the Bramford years when it was appalling, even worse than we had the last 2 years. So, there's highs and lows all the time. I think the key is, as a fan, you're always going to be there. I sometimes joke, I've had 2 wives. Incidentally, I don't intend to have any more, just in case my wife hears this, and she's been my wife for 30 years, so she's got a good chance of sticking around now. But I've only ever had one football team. And I don't mean that football team is more important than my wife, but actually I can't imagine changing my football team. And I know when we were talking about us going into administration when we were down in the League One days, and it was all so awful with a 10-point reduction, we were all still talking about, going to see the team in the sort of non-league, because that's what would have happened. There would have been thousands and thousands of fans who would have done that. Mm-hmm. So for me, that's what the whole thing's all about. You have your highs and your lows, but it is only a football game. And as long as you're entertained and excited and you don't lose that passion, which, isn't showing any signs of waning for me. And I see it in all the fans around me, everybody's so passionate. But I think our expectations, aren't the same as a big club. I love the European adventure. Could do with a few more of those. That was great fun. But, the chances are, just as we have over the last, 40 odd years, we do it every so often, not regularly.
Well, yeah. And when you do it that way, it makes it special. It doesn't become, we're not Arsenal or Chelsea where you have come to expect that as just being what you get to do every year. Or some people look at it as what you have to do every year. Arsenal fans, group stages, you do okay. And then you draw a big team in the round of 16 and you lose and you're out. And my Arsenal fan friends, that are fans just kind of take that for granted, and then when they didn't have that, it was this big shock. And whereas I think you talk to all of the Saints fans going into Europe, this was something special. People still talk about going over to Italy. They still talk about, those European nights because they don't, like you said, they don't come around very often. And I think that's something special. I think that shows that it's not that we don't think we should win or we don't, want to be there, but we understand that that's, we had to build for several years to get to that point. And then, unfortunately we didn't make the most of it.
Well, I agree with you. That game at the San Siro was pretty much one of the highlights of all those 54 years. And being there with nearly 9,000 Saints fans was really something quite special. Even though we lost, it sort of almost didn't matter really. The fact we were there and the atmosphere. I've got on my desktop a recording of just before the game, the singing of "When the Saints," mm-hmm. and it always cheers me up, and always will. But you're right, it's because it's a bit special for us. I remember the League Cup final, probably was it 2 or 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. Manchester United. It was obvious that it just didn't matter as much to the Manchester United fans as it did to us.
Right.
It was just another game for them. You see it when there's a cup final and one of the big teams loses. Their fans don't stay for the, trophy giving or anything else. They just leave the stadium. Our fans, when we lost at Cardiff in 2003, I think we were in the ground for, an hour afterwards because no one wanted to lose the experience. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what separates Saints from, the so-called big top six.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like you said, it's those moments that that you kind of savor and you remember and you get, nostalgic about at some point. And, things like your first memory at a ground or at the team or with the team. And then, kind of those instances. I remember watching the cup final. There were 7 of us, 7 Saints fans, and the rest of the pub was Man United fans. And, there was a guy there, who was visiting. He was visiting America from Southampton. He's from Southampton. And, I walked into the pub and kind of like peeked my head around the corner and just see a sea of Man United fans. And he yells at me and says, "Oh, we're over here." And he just said, "You got to sing the whole time." And I said, like, "I have to go to work after this." And he goes, "No, you're going to drink some beer and you're going to sing." And that's what we do. And I said, "Okay, and let's go for it." And then when I showed up to work, they said, "What happened to you?" I go, "I'll be all right. I promise. I just need a few minutes and some coffee and I'll be okay." But, it was, I'm never going to forget that no matter what happens with the team, no matter, where we wind up, that's never, that experience is never going away.
Yeah, and that for me is what it's all about, really. You want to have those experiences. I still remember all the lows as well, but it's that, like I said, you're going to be there forever. And we're going to have ups, we're going to have downs. I just feel it's important for the club and the players to connect with the fan base, because I think that the club's all about the fan base, really. Managers come and go, coaches come and go, owners come and go, players come and go. But the fans, are mainly there for life, and always will be. And I think, for me, that's what the club's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I kind of do want to talk a little bit about the book, and because, this is our conversations bringing all kinds of other things into my head, but just when you were writing the book, are these the type of things that you worked into it, that kind of guided you, or how, did you go about kind of thinking about or deciding what went into the book and what didn't go into the book? And I guess what we haven't talked about is even, what the kind of structure of the book is, what people can expect when they open it up.
Yeah, well, I think the book came really to fruition. I've written a few books in my business career and a few humorous books. So, but when we were on a coach to Swindon Town away back in the League One days, some young lads around me started sort of asking me questions. You could obviously see I was one of the older people there, and I started sort of answering their questions and telling them a few stories, and the questions just kept coming. And Glenn, who sits next to me at St Mary, said to me, "You've got to write a book about this. You've got to tell these stories over the years, because I've known you a long time and I didn't even know what you just said." So I decided to write the book. I wanted to not make it sort of an autobiography of my sort of support, because that wouldn't be necessarily interesting for people, but really sort of home in all the time on the passion, what we've just been talking about. The book's called Being a Saint, but the subline is the pain, passion and pleasure of being a Southampton FC fan. So it was all about homing in on the pain, passion and pleasure over the years in a sort of light-hearted way, but also to, try to connect with other people. And the feedback that I've had from people is that's what's happened. They read it and they remember their own first games, and they remember games that I refer to that they were at or saw on TV or whatever. So, that's really what I wanted to do, to sort of, articulate all those passions and things just through my own eyes, which is the only way I could. Mm-hmm. I'm not the best Saints fan out there. John, who sits behind us in the Kings of the North, is a much better fan than me, goes to every single away game, but I am passionate about Saints, and there's a lot of people out there who are much more diligent fans than I am. But it's really to share with the fan base, the passion, and sort of, be proud of it, really, because it's who we are, really. And over 54 years, we've certainly had some ups and downs. So that's what I've tried to do. Just give my own perspective. Some games I didn't get to all of them. And there's even periods in those 54 years where, you know what it's like. Your life intervenes. You can't actually get to as many games. You know, I've had season tickets for many of those years, but not all the years. You know, and there's been other years and periods where I couldn't get as much. But I've always gone, but sometimes more than others. But, you know, the passion never leaves you. And I think, you know, when you're a true fan, when you're following the game, wherever you are, what the score is. Because it doesn't matter where I am in the world or where I am with my life. If we're playing, I'm looking to follow what the score is.
I mean, people, you tell people from my perspective over here, you know, normal kickoff time for me is 7 a.m. And, you know, you get up, it's nice because everybody here is kind of asleep. If we give up an early goal or score an early goal, then they're awake because I yell. It doesn't matter which way it goes. And then, you know, I don't know. It doesn't leave you. And I despise the evening kickoffs just because, like, tomorrow's match, we're speaking on Sunday, tomorrow's match against Brighton is noon, and I'll be at work, and it'll be like that. The hardest thing for me to do tomorrow will be to focus on what I'm supposed to be doing, because I will want to constantly be checking the score and constantly be listening to the radio or you know, watching on my phone, which is not, you know, as an adult, you can't always do that. But we're kind of connected to it all the time, and it's something that you just kind of focus on, and it's gonna dominate my day tomorrow probably, and hopefully I do an adequate job at the rest of the stuff I'm supposed to do.
Well, my worst experience of that was the 2003 Cup final, which I didn't get to, but I've got a great excuse, because our eldest daughter got married that day.
Oh, no.
When they booked their wedding date sort of 18 months in advance, first of all, I didn't even know it was Cup final day. But obviously, secondly, I never assumed Saints would get in the final. So, and of all the things that I just had to go to, it was that. So I was giving my Father of the Bride speech at the same time we were losing 1-0 to Arsenal. And to make it even worse, it was a hotel near Portsmouth and Southampton. So I paid one of the waiters to come and give me a tip-off on the game and the score. But I have a hunch he was a Pompey fan, and I think he enjoyed telling me the score.
Yeah.
So that was a horrible experience. And if my daughter Natalie's listening to this, I apologize.
She'll understand. And I mean, can I ask you just what your thoughts were when, you know, because obviously the wedding date's scheduled far in advance and you're making all these arrangements, and then, you know, Saints get to the Cup final and this is the day. How soon did you realize this was going to be, you know, they were going to conflict with one another?
I knew when we beat Wolves in the quarterfinal, I knew then. So when I went to the semi-final at Villa Park when we beat Watford, and it was a sort of bittersweet that I was so overjoyed I knew we were in the final, but I knew that I couldn't go. Obviously, I wouldn't let my daughter down, but apart from anything else, I was terrified. If I even suggested to my wife, well, I wouldn't be here talking to you now. So, you know, it wasn't even on the table for lots of reasons. As I say, I wouldn't have let my daughter down, but I knew then, quarterfinal, the semi-final, when we won and we were all celebrating, there was a little bit of me that was so sad that I knew I wasn't going to get there, because I knew that we don't get to many cup finals. So, it was... that was one of those experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked beforehand, and you have kids, and are any of your kids now Saints fans? Do they have any following of the club, or have they gone off and chosen big clubs or rugby or cricket or something else?
The two daughters are not really into football, although my eldest daughter I was referring to earlier would say she was a Saints fan. But what she has done is let me induct her son, my grandson, into being a passionate Saints fan. And our son, I tried really hard to make him a Saints fan, but he chose Chelsea. But he still comes to games with me, and I think there's not much in his support, really, if I'm honest. But he still calls himself a Chelsea fan.
All right.
He does love Chelsea. So I failed there. But both grandsons, 100% Saints. So, they come to games with me, and I love it. It just reminds me so much of when my dad took me.
Yeah. I was gonna say, because that would be special, especially having those memories. And obviously you're probably not passing them to the front of the stand and heading towards the back yourself. But, and if you were, you don't have to say it here because your daughter may, like you said, may listen. So don't worry about that. But, when you show up to the ground, when you take them to the ground, do you remember, I guess, the memories of going with your dad and kind of what that's like, and kind of maybe the emotions they're going through as they walk into a ground with the music and the, going up the stands and all that stuff?
Oh, absolutely. Especially it's not just the first game, it's every game. I took Logan to see the Leicester game a few weeks ago, and he's just still starstruck. He's now 9. I've got a funny story, actually. I took him to see the Crystal Palace game last season when we lost 2-1 in the middle of our dire run. And I think it was the first game where I really started to think, we could go down. And it was an evening game. I think he was still off school. It must have been early, just after the new year. And he was staying over with my wife and I was driving him back and listening to the talk show call-in. And he was sat next to me and he said, "Grandad, are we going to go down? I don't want us to go down." And he started crying. And I was so angry. I nearly rang into this talk show and sort of said, "You overpaid footballers. You need to be in this car and see what you're doing to this little boy, But I didn't. It is very, very special. And it does remind me of my dad and him taking me. And I think, one of the things I always remember was when we won the Cup in 1976, our peak, really. I was there with my dad, and that was really special.
Yeah. Well, we won't talk about your son in the Chelsea in the semifinal, or maybe we should talk about that Premier League match you talked about when you thought we were officially going down. I try to be optimistic. I'm pretty pessimistic in a lot of things in life, and I try really hard to be positive about the team and try to make it fun for me, because if I go into a game and just going, we're destined to lose, and that doesn't make it good. But when we went 2-0 up on Chelsea and then managed to lose that game 3-2, the way it happened, I just said to myself, like, that's it. At that point, we're done and we're going down. I just didn't think we had the fight in us to come back and make a stand. And of course I was wrong, and I've never been happier to be wrong about anything. So,
I agree with you. That was the game I thought, because we played so well and we just couldn't hold on.
Mm-hmm.
And I really did think then, we are definitely going down. To the point we drew away at Leicester, and I sort of almost didn't think it mattered, but I was completely wrong. I was so pleased. But yeah, it was a dark period, and that was a game, I agree with you, that was a game where I thought we are actually going down.
Yeah, it hurt to admit a little bit, to some of my friends, because they had been saying it for months, and some of my friends who, were just like, "Man, if you're saying it now, like, we probably are." And it's like, yeah, you've been the one holdout, and now you're with us. So I don't know. But I want to talk a little bit about just writing in general, because you mentioned, you've written books in business, and you've written a couple of other books kind of on culture almost. I don't know if that's correct, but what made you want to start writing to begin with?
I think I've always sort of been interested in it. I sort of slipped into it really with my business because it was a natural thing to do to sort of influence the market and stuff. But I've always been interested in sort of behaviour, people's behaviour, culture, and humour. And as a kid, you know, I was an avid fan of Monty Python, and I think it was about sort of 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, I found an old sort of book I'd written, sort of cartoons and words sort of pinned together. That was a humorous book, or so-called. And when I found it in the loft, in the roof, and got it down, it actually made me giggle in a few places. So I sort of made my mind up I was going to expand from just business books. So I've written a few sort of human behavioural things and stuff about British culture, called Aren't We a Funny Lot? And they've done okay. And, well, there was obvious place to go was my passion for Saints, because I think, as my wife will say, it's something that really matters to me. So, yeah, it was the obvious progression, really.
I mean, it was the experience of writing the book about Saints, was it different than writing the other books, or was it in some ways just similar because it, you know, you're telling stories and that was something that just kind of came naturally, or you know, I guess I'm asking, just was there a different feeling around writing this book than writing some of the other business books or some of the other culture books that you've done in the past?
Oh, totally. Well, first thing is, I think I wrote the whole book in a month, whereas business books take 6 months. Because I have to do it weekends, evenings, you know, every bit of time I can fit in. So there was a passion driving through it. But the second thing was, it was thoroughly enjoyable because, of course, I wasn't just reminding other people of events, I was reminding myself. So as I was taking myself through all these years, you know, I was revisiting some fantastic experiences. And, of course, reminding myself, because, you know, the great thing about the internet is you can do all this research. So you can look up, you know, every game. So in each of the 44 chapters, you know, I can feature, you know, the team, who scored the goals, the attendance, the date, thanks to the internet. So, you know, and a lot of the time, you know, I was looking at the teams going, wow, we had a really good team then. And, you know, you sort of lose a little bit of sight of some of this stuff. So, yeah, I absolutely loved doing it, and it was just like revisiting all those amazing experiences. You know, not all about the games. You know, a few wage apes. You know, there's a few bits about, you know, all the things that we used to have go on in the old days at the Dell and the hooliganism and stuff. So there was all sorts of things over the years. So, yeah, it was really enjoyable. But as I say, I think the indicator of how this was different to the business and other books is it only took me a month to write, because I just couldn't put it down.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes I get worried that doing this show, there is an element sometimes of work, and I love doing the show, but sometimes, whether it's the editing or taking notes during a game, sometimes I just want to watch the game and I can't, you know, because I have to write stuff down or I have to remember it or whatever. But as you were going through this, did writing the book, did it change the way you looked at the team as you're going through that month? So maybe it's only 4 or 5 matches where you're writing the book. Did it change the way you were viewing those matches because you were trying to look for moments to put in the book, or no? No,
not really. I think what I did notice is, although I said the idea for the book started back in the League One days, I didn't actually get round to doing it until last season. And what I found was, and this is so quite funny really, but I wrote the last chapter and then things changed, so I had to rewrite the last chapter, and then things changed, so I had to rewrite the last chapter. So I realised how my perspective of how things are going is a variable that changes quite quickly, to the point that I think if we beat Brighton on Monday, and people will know the answer to this, I guess, when they hear this, the perspective is going to be completely different to if we lose. one good win makes all the difference. And I think I realised that because it's not written in tablets of stone exactly. It changes in an instant. Look at that away win at Swansea last year. Mm-hmm. Everybody's perspective changed. Just one game, one goal.
Yeah, a very ugly goal,
but
also so beautiful.
There is one other beautiful goal which goes back a long way. In our 1976 Cup run, we were playing Aston Villa at home in the third round of the Cup. And it was a miserable, wet, awful January day. And Villa scored, and we were losing, and we were going out. And Hugh Fisher scored an equaliser literally out of the blue in the last minute. And that literally changed the whole history of Southampton Football Club, because it meant we were able to replay, and then we won the replay, and we went on to get to Wembley and to beat Manchester United. Mm-hmm. So we're our biggest ever day. And, that all literally changed on that one goal in the last minute by Hugh Fisher. And it really says everything about football, that it can change on a dime,
Yeah, yeah.
Another thing I was thinking about was, there's probably only about 5,000 of us Saints fans who attended that cup final that are still alive, which is a scary thought.
And I mean, thinking back to the cup final now, there's only so many tickets given for each team, and then you look at the average age of most of the people who are attending the matches. Of course, that would put them nearer the end of their lives, I guess. And so, yeah, it would be a smaller number of people that are around. And I remember trying desperately to find someone who was there when we were going into the last cup final to talk to. And I had a couple of people lined up, and then, some of them said, like, I don't know what Skype is. I'm not doing it. All this stuff. And so I wound up not being able to find anyone, but that's okay. It is what it is. But, I guess kind of staying with the recent years, and not necessarily the past 2 or 3, but just more recently, are there players that have kind of stuck out to you that you have looked at? I know we've lost a lot of players and stuff like that, but just players that you have kind of been drawn to over the course of your Saints career?
Well, my favourite, of course, is Matt Letizia, who was a genius, just was a joy to watch. I love Francis Benali because he was such a fighter. And Mick Shannon was also in his time great. In the promotion years, absolutely adored Ricky Lambert. I loved, his attitude, his connection with the fans. Those years were fantastic. I also really enjoyed those years, the Pochettino Koeman years, when, we had people like Pella, who I really enjoyed, Mane, who was a great player, if a bit interesting, and, Jay Rodriguez when he was at his peak. That was a special sort of time for me. Thoroughly enjoyed that. So, yeah, there's been some great times recently, and, as I say, great players over the years. I particularly like Højbjerg in the current squad, because I just like his attitude. He sort of seems to be the sort of player that fits Saints, It's just a personal view.
I agree. I think he has the, he just seems to go, and he seems to be passionate about it. He seems to be working, and we had just built him up a couple of weeks ago, and then he went and had that he fell, and got himself sent off. And, that was frustrating because he had been fighting to get in the team, and I think it was hard for Hughes to drop Romeu, simply because he's really the only holding midfielder, I guess, we have. But in that formation that we're playing now, we don't have necessarily room for just somebody who's just going to sit.
Yeah, I think that's the problem with the formation we're playing. You can't afford to have, that in the central midfield. I still think they're not 100% sure about what, formations we're playing. I think there's still a bit of sort of fine tuning, but at least the games are much more enjoyable and exciting now.
Yeah. I think giving Hughes the summer and honestly having a lot of our attacking players not go to the World Cup, I think helped because they got back in early. And as much as I would have loved to have been able to see more of our players play in the World Cup, the fact that we weren't there, it just meant that we had the preseason, we had the, some of the guys got to go off and do. I know Nathan Redmond was here in LA, and I've talked about that before, and he was, working on just his fitness and his strength and his. I think he got some confidence from that, and that shows. And I think that has been great, But I mean, I don't know how many. It's still early in the season. I don't know how much you've been able to watch of this season, but do you see a difference between what we're doing maybe this season versus last season?
Yeah, I've been to quite a few games. I've only got to one away game, the Brighton League Cup game. So I've seen quite a bit of us this season. I'd say it's promising. It's not the finished article, but it's promising. I like what I see. We're much more exciting to watch. I'm not altogether sure the managers worked out exactly what's our best formation, but I think the Palace away game was a big win. I just want to see us have some good wins at home. It's been so many years since we've had a lot of good high quality home wins, and I think for most fans, that's the games they get to see. So I think we just need to get a few good wins under our belt for everybody to feel better. But I'm more optimistic now than I have been for some considerable time.
I think that's reasonable. Last season, I know when we brought Hughes in, I talked to a couple of City fans and a couple of other fans who had Hughes at their club, and they weren't excited. They weren't optimistic, and obviously, I think you just have to rule Stoke out because at that moment they're fairly bitter and they're not happy about where things are at. But even some of the Manchester City fans, they just said, we weren't sure he was gonna be any good. But I think he's the right fit. I think he's the right fit for some of the players that we have and some of the adjustments that need to be made to the team. And especially, to me, you look at Koeman, who was this. He's a fairly big personality. He had the pedigree for both his playing career, and he brought that with him to his managerial career. He was outspoken. And then you look at where we went after that with Puel and Pellegrino, who were just quiet and maybe lacked that ability to command the respect of the squad. And then Hughes just comes in and doesn't deal with that. He just is not going to stand for that. And I think we saw that with Buffal and all that stuff. But I think he's just been able to kind of assert himself on the team and still working with things and still being, being willing to tinker and move, but just standing up for the team and standing up to the team, I think, in some respects, and just saying that this is how things are going to go. This is what we're going to work on. This is how we're going to do. This is what I want you to do. And I think that has been just a huge lift to the team.
Yeah, and I think it's very much the Saints way. That's what the fans want. They want to see the players giving everything they've got. I think prima donna overpaid footballers are not really the Southampton way. I just don't think that will connect with the fans. I think they want to see people give it all they got. And, I think we've got to be careful with our buying, because over the more recent years we haven't done too well. And I think we need to think about the sort of players we buy. Question is, being Saints, are we ever going to be able to go out there and buy the finished article at sort of 30 million? I think the answer is no, not if we're going to be financially viable. And therefore we have to find players or bring them through the academy. So, we're not a big six team. We can't go out there and do that sort of thing. So the only disappointment for me is over the last couple of years, our buying has generally been a bit disappointing.
Yeah, it definitely has. And, I guess I want to ask, do you, as somebody who's been involved in business and doing other things, do you look at the club and go like, that's bad business? Do you look at the club and say sometimes to yourself, like, why would you do this? This is a mistake? Or do you just you try to separate that out and just enjoy it for what it is? And
That's a great That's a great question, actually. Because I'm, over the years, advised advisors how to advise businesses on finances, I can't break away from my natural inclination, which is you can't run a business that makes a loss because it will soon go bust. So I can't avoid that whenever I'm looking at this. So if I was to see Saints spending money they didn't have, I would worry a lot, because essentially what I want is the club to continue. So having said that, I don't really buy into I don't get really interested in all the finances around the club, because that's not what being a fan's all about. But I do get that they've got to be viable. We saw what happens when they're not. Mm-hmm. There was a period there before our great saviour came in and saved us where we might not have been in existence. And that was scary. I think, I can't avoid my natural inclination, which is but what I'm not is going to play Championship Manager, with Saints online, because I think that's where a lot of this comes from. Sometimes when you read the fans forums, it's like reading a financiers forum where everybody's talking about the money all the time. But yeah, unfortunately, I think that's football nowadays.
Yeah. I think and one big problem with social media and the internet is somebody says, I have a source, this is the deal, and then people run with it. And half the time it's somebody sitting in their living room or in their mom's basement, coming up with stuff and just watching the chaos that ensues. And I think that drowns out the people who actually do have sources and actually do have people close to the club who actually do know stuff. And it becomes harder and harder to kind of decipher, what's somebody just looking to get a rise out of people and what's somebody, who's actually well informed and well intentioned in what they're doing.
Yeah, well, it's so hilarious when we get to transfer deadline day, and everybody spots everybody at Southampton airport, and it proves to all be just fallacy. But yeah, I mean, it's because people are passionate about the club, of course, and they want every snippet of information they can get. But I think, when it comes to just money, for me, that's not what it's about. But I do need the club to be viable. I don't want them to go bust. Right.
No, I mean, to me as an American fan, I want the club to be around, and then I want them to be in the Premier League, because outside of that, it becomes much more difficult to have access to the team in terms of being able to watch games. And I have done podcasts or done episodes where I wasn't able to watch the game, and it's not quite the same. I feel like I'm asking questions where I don't have an idea of what I'm kind of trying to get to, because I don't know the ins and outs of the match, and I don't like that. So I like being able to see the team, and maybe once or twice, once every couple of years, being able to actually go over and watch the team, and hopefully next time it'll be at home and we won't lose 3-0 to West Ham. So we'll see. But yeah, I mean, is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to make sure that we talked about, or you wanted to make sure we got in here?
Well, I'd just like to say that actually my favourite 2 years ever were when we were in League One and got promoted from the Championship. Which is strange when you think I was a passionate fan when we had Kevin Keegan, and then when we finished second in the league. Mm-hmm. But actually, I love those years because we regained our identity as a club, and everything was positive, and we were going forward, and we were winning lots of games, and there's nothing better than winning lots of games. So I just think it's important we have our identity, and I think we can have that in the Premier League, and we've had it for several years. We were looked upon as, as a poster boy for other clubs. And I just think it's important for the club to realise, and the fans to realise, what makes us special, and, be true to that, really. But those 2 years, when I had some amazing experiences going away to clubs that I never thought I'd ever go to, and thoroughly enjoyed every minute. So that was a bit of a surprise. On the other hand, when we were appalling in the Championship before we went down, was quite shocking and an experience I don't want to repeat.
I guess that would be one of those times where I was glad I wasn't quite around yet, because I've watched my the Houston Astros be on the brink of a World Series and fail, and watch what spending money you don't have will do to you, and gone through 10 years of just being a dumpster fire, basically, having a stadium that we couldn't fill, having basically to field players who weren't quite at the level that we needed them to be in Major League Baseball, and then watching us also steadily in the background build this club that was going to be change direction and be there, and to watch Saints and look at them kind of have the academy that was there, and to bring those players through, and to buy, spend money wisely in the market and develop those players to be the product they are. That to me is great. So it's been a fun ride thus far, and I'm looking forward to much more.
Yeah, I think probably the obvious high for me over all those 54 years was the 1976 FA Cup final, which I knew at the time probably would never get beaten. That was really special. But I think also the low for me was 17th of January 2009 at home to Doncaster Rovers in the Championship. We lost 2-1. That took us, I think, bottom in the league, and the attendance was 15,837. And I remember it well because the fans were fighting amongst themselves and the atmosphere was toxic, and it was a real low. So, we've had some highs and we've had some lows, but we will continue to have them. But those were my highs and lows.
All right. We do have two quick questions from some of the listeners that I like to ask, and one of them, Ollie_Smith_71 on Instagram, just asks, where do you think we're going to finish this season? So I guess I'll just ask you that. It's early, but where do you think where do we belong in this run of Premier League teams?
My hunch is between about 10th and 13th, somewhere there. I'm not quite sure we're good enough to get in the top 10. I hope I'm wrong. I think we're probably too good to be in a relegation fight. Again, I hope I'm right. Mm-hmm. So I think sort of slowly building our way back up would be my hunch, but it is only a hunch.
And then Tactics FC, who helps kind of promote the podcast. This guy develops websites and does a bunch of other stuff, and he's great. But anyway, he has asked kind of what is the point of Southampton, and I think this comes from the fact that you look at are we one of these mid-table teams who just the point is to survive and just be in the Premier League to kind of rake in the money from a business side of things, or are we there to kind of build a team and then make a run towards to challenge for Europe every once in a while, or what do you think this is? And I think this changes for everybody, but I think also some people just ask this question as like a throwaway question, but I kind of want to address it semi-seriously, I guess, if we can.
Well, I think we have to be realistic. I think for me, the point is passion and excitement. So we play good football. We're a bit different. We're true to our roots and our fan base. But we stay in the Premier League because we don't want to not be in the Premier League. I don't see it as survival if you're playing exciting football. I'd like to beat the big teams from time to time, which I think we can do. And I think on our best seasons, we can get into Europe. We can win a cup. And let's face it, we should have won the League Cup 2 or 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's difficult, like meeting Chelsea in the semi, when you sort of know if they try hard, we're probably going to struggle. But yeah, we can do that. And I don't think it's survival. I think if you watch exciting football and you've got your passion for the club, I don't think that is survival. Is it realistic to compete with Manchester City? No, we can't ever generate that sort of revenues that and the fair play rules, without getting into politics, basically ensure that the big clubs stay big.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because I don't know whether well-intentioned or not. Sometimes what you think a policy will do and what the policy actually does are two completely different things. So we'll leave that there. But I just want to say thank you again for being willing to come on and talk about the book, and thanks for writing the book. And I'm looking forward to it. And we will be giving away a copy of the book, and the details for that will be kind of in the show notes and all that stuff. So thank you for coming on, and we'll talk to you hopefully again at some point down the line. Maybe we'll do a normal kind of episode where we'll talk about a game, and we'll just lament or our frustrations or celebrate a victory.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. And that does it for this episode of the Southampton Delivery Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you enjoyed it. Special thanks goes out to my guest this week, Richard Walters. You can find more from him at richardwaltersauthor.co.uk, or you can retweet the tweet that is pinned on my page and give him a follow at rwaltersauthor, and you can have a chance to win a copy of his new book, Being a Saint. I cannot express to you how excited I am to have another Saints book to get my hands on. The last two have been fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to this one as well. As always, special thanks to Matt Beeling of the We Are Southampton page for doing the logo for the show. And special note, this week, that page turned 4. So 4 years of We Are Southampton edits. Matt, great job. Keep up the good work. It's a pleasure to be able to work with you, and I hope that we can continue in the future. So best of luck to you, man. Thanks. This podcast is partnered with the Southampton page. So on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, for all your Southampton FC news and needs, be sure to check out the Southampton page. You will not be disappointed. Music for the show comes courtesy of the Free Music Archive at freemusicarchive.org. The intro song is Epic Song by Boxcat Games, and the end of show credits that you're listening to right now is Aim is True by Poddington Bear. If you're wondering how to get more episodes of this show, you can subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, Acast, Google Play, TuneIn Radio, or wherever you get your podcasts, including the new Google Podcast app for Android users. If you search Delivery with 2 L's, you should be able to pull it up. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, you can do that on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or email. We're on Twitter and Instagram at SFCDELL_IVERY. We're at facebook.com/SFC Delivery, and the email address is southamptondelivery@gmail.com. We welcome all feedback. And if you have some good stuff, why don't you leave a review on iTunes or wherever you listen, and make sure you tell a friend about the show. But enough of that. We'll be back after the Liverpool game. We'll talk to you next week. And until then, remember that together, we march on. If I could just really get these guys out of my head, that'd be great.